Hey everybody, welcome to the second lymphatic system lecture. We're going to finish up some lymphatic organs today, like the thymus, the spleen, the tonsils, do some lymphatic tissue as well. So the thymus is this pretty interesting lymphatic organ. It is most active during the fetal period. So this is a fetal thymus right here. Can you tell what organ it is covering up? It is covering up the heart, in fact. So we can see the heart underneath it. We can see that superior vena cava, brachiocephalic vein, jugular veins right there, subclavian vein right there. You can see some common carotid arteries here and here, subclavian arteries. Anyhow, I'm getting distracted by blood vessels there. This is the infant thymus. This is the infant thymus microscopically. So the thymus is where T lymphocytes are going to mature and become active immune cells. So if you don't have a functioning thymus, you don't get active T lymphocytes, which are crucial for your immune response. The thymus is a little bit unique amongst lymphatic organs in that it doesn't do any killing. So lymph nodes, spleen, tonsils, they're going to be very much involved in filtering, killing bacteria, viruses, etc. The thymus is not. The thymus is all about getting T lymphocytes, which are these super important immune cells, getting them ready to do their job. And it makes sense that the thymus is super active in the fetal period, in infancy, small kid period of life, because we got to get these T cells going early. We can't survive without functioning T cells, so we need the thymus to be big and active in the small child. In fact, if you haven't figured this out already, maybe you guessed this by now, the T in T lymphocyte stands for thymus. Okay, here I see a thymus of a small child. Look at the size of it relative to the heart, relative to the lungs, and then compare that to the adult's thymus. Pretty much when you get, when you're over 10, your thymus is going to start getting fatty and fibrous, and it gets fattier and more fibrous as you get older and older. This is the histology of the infant thymus. Notice the abundance of the purple coloration here. Remember, purple is indicative of lymphocytes, and that's no surprise because T lymphocytes mature in the thymus. This is more zoomed in, by the way. This is more zoomed out. So this thymus has still some active areas, but it is mostly adipose tissue. This is all adipose tissue in here. So thymus, very important early on in life. Okay, with that, we're done with the thymus. Check out the spleen tucked in behind those false ribs and floating ribs on the left. There's that spleen right there near the colon and the pancreas and the kidney and the stomach. I see the splenic artery and the splenic vein nicely tucked under the diaphragm in that upper left quadrant. Now, jobs of the spleen include its number one job, which we touched on when we talked about blood cells. Its number one job is getting rid of old, beat up red blood cells. The spleen also is going to store monocytes and store platelets. You release those during a fight or flight response. The spleen is also involved in filtering the blood, on the lookout for bacteria and viruses. So because it is doing this, it is an organ in which we are meeting foreign things, and we know we call that meeting of foreign things for the first time is called antigen challenge. So these are my big functions of my spleen. As far as its structure goes, it has a connective tissue capsule around it. The connective tissue capsule has inward connective tissue extensions that are called trabeculae. We saw this in the lymph node as well. And there are a lot of reticular fibers in the spleen forming its internal scaffolding, its internal framework. And we know that internal framework of reticular fibers was referred to as the stroma. Okay, on that note, there's a nice spleen right there, splenic artery and vein going in. Of course, who would have the older red blood cells? Would it be the artery or the vein? That is a good question for you to ponder. Let me know what you come up with. Now let's zoom in on the spleen and its histology. So in this spleen, we do see the capsule out here. We see trabeculae that are coming in, like inward extensions of the capsule. And then inside the spleen, we have two areas. We have red pulp. So this is red pulp right here. And then this is white pulp. So remember, big function of the spleen was going to be destroying red blood cells. And it just kind of stands to reason that we do that red blood cell destruction in the red pulp. Think about the white pulp as being the domain of white blood cells, and that is where we are going to be on the lookout for pathogens. All right, let's look at the real deal, the real histology of the spleen. There we go. We can identify some things. This is the connective tissue capsule right here. We see trabeculae. I got one here. I got chunks of trabeculae that are cut in cross-section as well. And then this is red pulp right here. This is white pulp. Notice how the white pulp is purple. Purple is indicative of lymphocytes. So that is where my pathogen filtration is taking place. Red pulp, so this is red pulp over here. Red pulp right here. Red pulp is where we are on the lookout for old and ugly red blood cells. And that is it for the spleen. Fantastic. Let us continue and deal with the tonsils. Your major tonsils, you have a trio of them. You have your pharyngeal, your palatine, and your lingual tonsils. Pharyngeal meaning in the pharynx, palatine in the palate, lingual on the tongue. So initials PPL. Don't forget, people have tonsils. And these tonsils are forming a ring of lymphoid tissue at the entrance to the pharynx. And that makes sense because bacteria, viruses are going into our oral cavity, into our nasal cavity all the time. So in general, a tonsil has a connective tissue capsule, but it is kind of weird. Like if I drew a lymph node, let me draw a lymph node. There's a lymph node. The lymph node has a connective tissue capsule all around the entire thing. The spleen, same deal. The spleen has the same exact thing. But because tonsils are exposed to the surface, so a tonsil, because it's exposed to a surface, the tonsil is going to have a connective tissue capsule on the underside of it, but then where it's exposed to the surface, it's going to have an epithelial lining. So because the tonsils are exposed to your nasal and oral cavity, they got to have an epithelial lining to them. Now, another thing that's interesting about tonsils is they have crypts. So this is a tonsillar crypt right here, and you can see it kind of is like extending down here. This is where we trap bacteria. And now our tonsils, in this micrograph here, we see the abundance of purple. Abundance of purple means an abundance of lymphocytes, which makes sense if I'm trying to kill invading microorganisms. All right. Let's look at some tonsils right here. This is the palatine tonsil right here. And we're seeing the exposed part. So the part we're looking at here would be covered by epithelium. So palatine tonsils, kind of in the back of the oral cavity there. The uvula is the thing that hangs down. These are my biggest tonsils. They're also the most often infected as well. Okay. In the back of the nasopharynx, so right here, this is where we've got the pharyngeal tonsil. And by the way, where I put the red line, that's where the connective tissue would be. And then the epithelial lining, whoops, let's get a better marker here, come on. There we go. The epithelial lining will be right there. So that is the pharyngeal tonsil, also known as the adenoids. This region right here that we're in, this region here is the nose part of the throat. So this is called the nasopharynx, nose part of the throat. And we're in the back of the nasopharynx. And that makes sense because we breathe in nasties and then crash. They run into that tonsil and we kill them. So that's our pharyngeal tonsil. The final tonsil is the lingual tonsil, which is on the base of the tongue. We see it right there. Again, the epithelial part would be the part exposed to the surface here. Then the connective tissue capsule would be on this part right here. Lingual tonsil makes sense because, well, if we're eating and drinking and we're getting microorganisms in our food or drink, dun 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 dun, I can get them right there. This guy is number 5, that lump right there. That is actually the palatine tonsil. Also well positioned to catch ingested microorganisms. Fantastic. So those are my 3 tonsils. I see all of them here as well. See if you can point out these 3 tonsils. Find them. If you get stuck, as always, come and ask me. Okay, so we've just done a bunch of organs. Like last time we did lymph nodes. Today we talked about the thymus, the spleen, the tonsils. Let's talk about some lymphoid tissue. So not organs per se, just aggregations, collections of lymphoid cells that are going to destroy pathogens, activate the immune system. Lymphoid tissue can be kind of spread out. We call that diffuse lymphoid tissue, or packed together. Those are known as lymphoid follicles. So, the most prominent lymphoid tissue is this stuff called MALT. MALT stands for mucosa associated lymphatic tissue. And a mucosa is a mucous membrane. And mucous membranes, what they do is they line our tracts. So mucous membranes are the lining of our tracts. And by the word tract here, I mean the digestive tract, the respiratory tract, the reproductive tract, the urinary tract. All of these have mucous membranes lining them. Of course, they're called mucous membranes or mucosae because they make mucus. And all of these tracts are places where microorganisms can and do enter our body. Now, this right here, this is the lining of the small intestine. So this is the mucous membrane of the small intestine. And what I want you to notice is that under this epithelial lining, so like in here, in here, in here, we've got all this purpleness. And this purpleness is lymphatic tissue, lymphocytes and assorted cells. And so this is MALT in here. Now the MALT can be spread out. Our better word for spread out is diffuse, or it can be packed together. We learned about the word follicle. Another word for packed together lymphatic tissue is the word nodular. So nodule, not node, but nodular. Now the 2 most prominent tracts with this mucosa associated lymphatic tissue are my digestive tract and my respiratory tract. And in my digestive tract, we talk about gut-associated lymphatic tissue. In my respiratory tract, we talk about bronchial or bronchus-associated lymphatic tissue. So I got a lot of malt in these two tracts. And on that note, let's talk about the packed together lymphatic tissue, which I can find in my malt. I'm going to find packed together lymphatic tissue in my malt, which is in all four tracts. And of course, in my galt and in my balt. Galt and balt. Okay. This right here, there it is. This right here is a lymphoid follicle or nodule. That's where the lymphocytes are really packed together. I also found these I almost said nolicle and fodule. These follicles and nodules and lymphoid organs. We saw these guys in lymph nodes. We saw these guys in the tonsils as well. And go back and look at those if you need to. Okay, good. There is a special collection of follicles in the distal ileum. The distal ileum is the last part of the small intestine. And all of these things with the blue arrows on them, plus this guy here, and this guy up here, these are all lymphatic follicles or nodules. And I have big clusters of them in my distal ileum. And this collection is called a Peyer's patch. Why do we have a collection of an abundance of follicles in our distal ileum? Well, our distal ileum is the end of the small intestine. What comes after the small intestine? The small intestine leads onward to, can you guess it? Can you tell me? The large intestine. And guess what lives in your large intestine? Lots and lots of bacteria. Do I want those bacteria to migrate from the large intestine to the small intestine? No, absolutely not. So towards the end of the small intestine, I'm going to have a lot of packed together lymphatic cells, and those collections of follicles is called a Peyer's patch. Fantastic. Finally, we got the appendix. So here's the small intestine, the distal small intestine, the end, the terminal part of the ileum. This is actually where I would find Peyer's patches, in the wall here. And I see my small intestine attaching to my large intestine. The large intestine has this little area called the cecum, and then coming off the cecum is the appendix. And the appendix contains a lot of lymphoid follicles, aggregates of lymphoid cells. Now, we got to understand the function of the appendix, okay? The appendix is a storehouse of bacteria. The appendix is a reservoir. It's a good word, reservoir. A reservoir of bacteria. Okay, let's look at this normal large intestine we see here. This normal large intestine is colored in green to represent the fact that there's bacteria throughout it. Now, this person is about to have some serious diarrhea. As they have the serious diarrhea, like one of the functions of diarrhea is to flush out the large intestine. So we're getting rid of bacteria. The problem is, in diarrheaing, we get rid of the good bacteria along with the bad. Luckily, when we diarrhea out all those bacteria, look at how the appendix remain green. then the bacteria from this area, this reservoir, can then repopulate the large intestine. So the appendix is a reservoir of bacteria, good bacteria. And why do we have lymphoid cells in it then? Well, we don't want the bacteria to go crazy, right? It's like, okay, we're keeping you here, but we got to guard you as well. We got to make sure you're good. So we have a lot of lymphoid cells, follicles of lymphoid cells in that appendix. And that, my friends, is lymphatic system lecture number 2. I told you it was going to be short. It was short. Fantastic. I'll see you next time when we are discussing the immune system. Bye-bye.